We'll get started.
And we are live.
Sweet. All right. Good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to NSTA. Thank you for taking time on your weekend. And thank you for choosing this particular session. I know you have at least 12 or 15 options for this time slot, all fantastic options, but you've chosen ours, so thank you so much. You are at the exhibitor workshop, MatterHackers exhibitor workshop for facilitating student agency through design challenges. So before I introduce our amazing speaker, I'd like to take a moment to let you know about our free giveaway. Actually, I'll put that in the chat in a minute, but before we do that, since you're here, I'd love to tell you a little bit about MatterHackers. Anybody that is on camera, hand raising if you know about MatterHackers, or blue hand raise. Yes, okay, great. My name is Mara Hitner, first of all. I am the VP of Strategic Partnerships for MatterHackers. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, MatterHackers is the largest retailer of 3D printers and materials. So if you go to matterhackers.com, you'll see that we carry over 70 different kinds of desktop 3D printers by all different brands, from like $200 to $10,000, and over 2,000 different types of materials. And schools and educators like working with us because of this, because we're completely agnostic. So we listen to where you're at in your 3D printing journey, whether you're brand new to 3D printing and you need curriculum or project ideas, or you're actually looking for advanced materials or machines to add to your classroom. And then we can make recommendations and provide training and support to make sure that you and your students are successful in your 3D printing. Okay, I did mention that giveaway. So I am going to throw in the chat right now the link. We are going to be giving away a 3D printing pen from 3Doodler, which you're going to hear more about in Mr. Jones' talk. Let's see, if you want to click over, you can sign up for the giveaway anytime during this talk, or you can kind of save that link and do that afterwards. We're going to email a winner on Monday, so no need to be present to win or anything like that. And that's it. Thank you for listening to a bit about our company. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce someone that I absolutely admire greatly, Mr. Steve Jones. Mr. Jones and I met through one of the ISTE PLNs. I think I hit you up and was stalking you, and we've seen each other at like a million conferences ever since. Mr. Jones is an instructional technology coordinator at Swanson in Northern Virginia. He is a STEAM specialist and an AI advocate. Using his own curriculum, he's taught a variety of STEAM classes over the years, and all of his students have participated in authentic learning experiences involving CAD, 3D printing, designing for accessibility, and artificial intelligence. So Mr. Jones also works with educators across all grade levels to support you with meaningful integration of technology into your teaching. So we're just honored to have him as a MatterHackers Education Ambassador, and we want to welcome Mr. Jones. How's it going, Mr. Jones?
It's going well. Happy to be here.
Yay. I'm so excited we're doing this. Okay, so let's get the slides up. Slides up. And while you're doing that, just a reminder, we will be utilizing the chat for a little interaction throughout the presentation. So if you have any questions, comments, please do throw them in the chat, and we will be sure to have time for Q&A at the end of the session. And if you have any particular questions that Tara can answer about like products or where to find stuff, she's there as well. All right, take it away, Mr. Jones.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, or morning, depending on where you're at. I'm happy to be here with you today and talk about how you can facilitate student agency through design challenges. Okay, so here's a brief outline that kind of goes over what I'm going to be talking to you about today. So first I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, but you already had a nice introduction. Then I'll talk about what I mean by facilitating student agency, so to make sure that's very clear for everyone. Then I'll go over some of the core concepts and tools that I utilize when working with students. I'll share some specific design challenges that I have done over the years and more recently with students across the middle grades. And then I'll talk about a challenge that's open to everyone across the world, and that's called Make Able, and I'll go into more detail. And then some resources through Build a Better Book and some of the work that's inspired me to do challenges with my students. And then I'll tie all that together at the very end with very specific strategies that you can utilize that ties back into everything I'll be discussing just about now. And then if there's any questions at the end, we can have that discussion. So as you've already heard, my name is Stephen Jones. I'm an instructional technology coordinator. I work in Arlington Public Schools, and if you're not familiar, that is right next door to DC. You can find me on social media if you're interested in seeing some more of the work that I do. But I've been working in education for a while, and I've been writing my own STEAM curriculum for the last 10 years or so. And now I'm still doing that, and I'm working with a variety of companies and nonprofits to kind of continue advocating for STEM and maker education, in addition to supporting educators across multiple grade levels. So what I mean when I say facilitating student agency, what I'm referring to is pretty much the opposite of what a lot of us probably experience at the university level if you went to a big school. So it's not about standing in front of a whole bunch of students and lecturing for an hour. It's more about providing a a very engaging experience with our learners, with our scholars, by introducing something that's going to be engaging and exciting for them. And you only want to do that in a short burst. So maybe doing a mini lesson that's maybe 15, 20 minutes at the most. And then you want to allow students to work independently or with a partner to move forward with the challenge that you may present to them. So when I say student agency, I'm referring to providing that voice and choice for students. So you should be creating a framework that allows students to be able to incorporate what's important to them, and that will engage them more in the work that you're trying to have them do, and still tie into the content standards that you feel are important for them to learn. So these are some of the concepts that I typically utilize when I am developing challenges for my students. I don't use all of them in every single project, but I do use a lot of them in each project. So the ones I say that I probably use the most, I would say would be the human-centered design, computational thinking, creating with purpose, and then this idea of collaboration. So at the very minimum, it's collaboration within the class. Then when possible, we communicate and collaborate with students and educators in our surrounding neighborhood. And then if we can do it on a national or global level, which sometimes we've been able to do, I think that's even better. I really love physics and math, so a lot of my projects, I am teaching students how to do proportions and doing things at scale because we have to make functional tools at times. And the same thing applies to physics. For things to function, it's good for students to understand how they work. And you'll see a couple examples of that a little bit later in some of my projects that we've done. Okay, so in terms of tools, we kind of have our foundational tools, and then we have ones that are a bit more complex. So in terms of foundational, depending on what you teach, you may have a different name for this, but I just use Sketchbook. So I have students keep a sketchbook to document their process for reflection and keep track of everything that they're doing. And I kind of combine this with the digital method as well for them to manage the design process. But you may call it a science journal or engineer's notebook. Prototype materials, which are good for getting our initial ideas out there, whether it's just for scale or to try to make a working prototype. So often I've used materials such as cardboard and clay, and some other materials when we've had them available. And those are usually on the cheaper end. You can get a lot of cardboard for free. If you're interested in doing augmented reality, which has been a high engagement level for students that I've worked with, and if your school has iPads, that's an option that you can use. And then usually in most schools, if you're not using iPads, you're probably either using maybe MacBook Air or Windows laptop or desktop, or maybe a Chromebook. And then one of the tools that I've really developed a strong like for over the years has been 3D pens. They're pretty easy to use. You can get ones that are lower temperature if you're working with younger students, and you can create a prototype very quickly with them. So moving on to other tools. So I'm really big into growth and students demonstrating their understanding over time, and utilizing photo, video, and audio software is a great way to do that. Also for sharing out their final solution to a particular challenge or problem. Using CAD and CAM software is your kind of starting point for doing 3D printing or engraving or pretty much anything of that sort of manner. And that's stuff that you can do, virtually at home. And then if you're able to eventually get access to that physical hardware, then you can do that. And then if you're really into electronics and robotics, learning about Arduino Unos, compatible microcontrollers, that sort of thing, is something that you may want to consider as well. So just once again, just to kind of clarify, my purpose today is to show you some examples of some of the design challenges I've done with students, and kind of explain how I've kind of provided students that opportunity to incorporate their voice and their choice, and how they kind of move forward with the challenge that I've presented to them, and how they choose to share that out. So this is a general overview of how I do my process when coming up with ideas and presenting them out to my students. This is a little bit of a simplification because it's a pretty in-depth process, but I wanted to share this as a general guide for you. So I've been designing my own curriculum for a while. I get my inspiration by things that are important to me, but I also want to create that framework that allows students to give me what they're interested in, and I can modify my project based on their interests. So I like to come up with challenges that are going to involve the community when possible, and involves meeting the needs of an individual person. So a lot of my challenges are heavily based upon that. So after I talk with my students, I do my mini lesson. They get assigned an individual that they're going to try to help. They work individually or ideally with a partner in order to come up with some ideas. So they identify the person, exactly what they need, they do some research, and they start sketching out ideas. And once they have kind of gone back and forth with me and their partner, then they start moving on to creating a physical prototype with the materials that we have available. And depending on whether they can make a functional prototype or not, they do that, and then start working with other students, or they start working with the end user to get feedback and work on revising it in order to meet their needs. And then eventually, after working back and forth and iterating on their design, they share out that final solution to their end user. So now I'm going to go over some specific examples. Some of them I was able to do with actual people. Other ones, it was more about the general idea of identifying a person, even though we couldn't work with someone, face to face. But the whole idea was the whole culmination of the ideas of what the students were going to be working on. So let me go ahead and show you, and I'll explain. So this is one of the projects that I've done. I started a few years ago, and it's kind of evolved ever since then. It's an architecture-based project, and my original motivation for it was from listening to a local story, and it was talking about how in some traditional neighborhoods they have been really good for young families, and recently they had started to change as developers were taking down single-family homes and were putting up expensive condos and apartments that were only meant for one person or two people at the most. And obviously for families, that's not the ideal situation. So what I was trying to develop with my students is some empathy, and also I wanted them to kind of understand basically the community, the people, and how much money someone needed to be able to afford to own a single family home. And I had challenged students to create a blueprint, make everything to the appropriate scale, but obviously scale down, and then develop a house that fit with the architecture of that particular neighborhood. Now, students are really interested in this, but I did have one of my students approach me and say, well, Mr. Jones, this sounds really cool, but I want to pick my own area outside of the neighborhoods that she picked. And I said, well, what exactly did you have in mind? And she explained to me that, there was a hurricane in Puerto Rico, and she has family there, and she's really interested in trying to work on creating a house to help her family. And I said, well, that sounds great. I can definitely, allow you to do that. Give me a day or two to kind of modify the project a bit to make it kind of fit in with what you're interested in. So it took me a day or two, and then I ended up modifying the project and made it an alternative option that was available to everyone. So I ended up coming up with a project that was based around the idea of creating a home that was going to help people who live in areas that are impacted by natural disasters. So she ended up taking on that theme and doing it based on creating a hurricane-resistant home. So she did all the research on that and incorporated her ideas, and she was even more engaged and was able to have phone calls with her family and explain to them what she was doing. And it really kind of took her enthusiasm for the project to the next level. And that's really kind of what I mean by designing a framework where you're being flexible and you're allowing students to feel comfortable to share, like, hey, well, I like this, but can I do this instead? And when you do that, students respect you more, and they really start to see your class as having a meaning beyond just the four walls of your classroom and seeing it as being more important. So here are some examples from other students working through variations of the same project. You can see them working in the early stages, creating their blueprint and their physical prototype. And you can see this is actually prototypes made with a 3D pen, like the doodler that I know was being offered through a giveaway. So anyway, they're really great tools. They're not very expensive, and my students have really loved it because if you're familiar with 3D printing, 3D printing can take a very long time to kind of work through. And if you are working with a whole lot of students and you're trying to give them that experience, sometimes if your hardware breaks down, it can be a long time before they can kind of see what their final design is going to turn out to be. So by providing a 3D pen as an additional part of your tool set, students can get that immediate engagement. So here in this example, this is another house, and we have two examples. So the one on the right, the blue one, is PLA. The one on the left is PLA as well, but we kind of use two different processes. So in 3D printing, if you are creating something and you have material on top of it, basically you need to create supports, right? And so it can print on top. So in this house here, they designed it so that the main living space was going to be elevated, right? So water wouldn't get in. So what we did was initially printed it with the support material, and it was kind of difficult for my students to remove the support material, and they didn't want to break the supports that were underneath that were supposed to be part of the model. And then it doesn't leave a very clean finish when you look at it from underneath. So what we ended up doing instead is we used PVA, which is a water-soluble filament, and we did that with the Ultimaker that allows you to put the model in water, and then all the supports disappear over time. It took about a day in this case, and then you have a really nice clean finish to it at the end. Here you can see using another example with the same project, the student used 3 different types of sticks or filament for the pen. You can see that on the left when they were kind of prototyping that out, and you can see the eventual design that they did within Tinkercad and 3D printed on the Ultimaker. The green filament is tough PLA, and the same thing with the blue filament below it. So just another perspective here. You can see STEM students really want to do all the interior details for the houses they were making. So I gave them that option. So listening to the two students who are working on this particular project, I mean, they were just so elated to be able to put in all this integral detail inside of the home they were creating for someone else. And it was a process. We had to work through our slicer and do a few test prints to kind of get an idea of how things were going to look at that smaller scale. One of the things that I'm really passionate about, and I know my students have really shown interest in this as well, is designing for accessibility. So you can see in this example here, a student worked through the process of doing observations and interviewing his mother because he wanted to help her. And he ended up coming up with this, which was designed to help her get better grip when going up and down the stairs in her home. This was from another student who wanted to help her neighbor. She only had usage of one arm and one hand, and she wanted to be more independent in being able to open up things around the house without assistance from her husband. So I said one of my students worked on creating this, and this is one of her prototypes. This here is from a collaboration with Engineering Brightness, which is a nonprofit in Fort Collins, Colorado. And they working with various families across the world and basically providing a solution through solar powered lanterns in areas where they have light poverty or they don't have easy accessible use to electricity. So through this collaboration with my middle school students and Tracy, who's one of the co-founders, we created a custom lantern for students and families in Liberia on the western coast of Africa. So as you can see here, the prototype we have kind of in the right upper hand corner was made with clay, and the render in the below was made in Fusion 360, and the first physical prototype down there in the lower right hand corner. Now we shared this with Tracy and we got some feedback. I really liked the design initially, and you kind of see this what their template of what their design looked like. But basically what she said was it looks cool, but it takes too long to print, it uses too much material, so you need to go ahead and make some revisions. So my students kind of went back to the drawing board using the base model that they initially provided us, and the whole idea of kind of customizing it based on the specific user, and hearing from people from Liberia saying they wanted something to include an element of like community. My students went in and made some changes. So you can see that version here, and it printed way faster, and it incorporated that element of community. So we still have kind of that design that represents the Liberian flag on one side, and then they have different aspects of community on the other. So they use symbols on one design, and the other one they have kind of like people meant to be like holding hands as well as a heart. So they really like that. We went through various iterations testing out PLA, PETG, tough PLA to see where some of the weak points would be at, to see where they may crack. And students had to make some revisions because the bottom part was separating, because they're really trying to find that balance between, making it print fast and not using too much infill, but still kind of keeping it strong enough to be able to hold up in case it was dropped. So that was a lot of testing to go along with that process. And just to kind of as a final note before I go on to the next thing, we were able to print out a lot of those, and they were able to be delivered to Liberia in February of this year. And we were able to do like a live video chat to see the students who were able to get them. It was a really great experience for them to be able to know that they helped contribute to improving the life for someone who didn't have access to electricity. So my next topic is related to the Make Able Challenge, and that is through Print Lab, and that is in partnership with MatterHackers and various other partners, and it's utilizing Autodesk software, so Tinkercad or Fusion 360, in order to help students develop empathy for people and create assistive technology that will help people that have mobility issues with their hands. And the great thing about this is it's available worldwide. It's a free competition. Tinkercad is free. Fusion 360 is free. It works on Macs, Windows, and Chromebooks. So if you have a Chromebook, you can still use Fusion 360. And it's great because they have two different levels that are based on under 13 and then 13 and up. But it's a really great opportunity if you don't have the time to develop your own design challenge or curriculum. This is a great starting point, and you can make your own modifications as necessary to support the needs of your students. So this is part of their process. They provide access to a toolkit to help you work through So you get like these initial inspirational videos. You get to hear from some people that have been helped, and it's really inspirational. I think students really connect with it. I'm working this process right now with some middle school students. And then you can work on building design skills if your students don't have that already. And then you can work with a make able user. I believe they have 3 specific users that you can utilize. But I believe the more powerful thing is if you can find someone within your community that you can reach out to and help. You develop that empathy for that individual that you're working with. You create that solution, you iterate, make that product, and then of course you share your story, and then you could win a 3D printer or other prizes from various different categories at the end. And the competition started, I believe, in the beginning of September, and you still have until the very first week of April, I believe April 1st, to submit a portfolio and submit your challenge on behalf of your students. So here you can see these are some other projects that I've done. While I do write my own curriculum, I still do it now. I've been doing it for a while. You don't always have to reinvent the wheel. It's okay to borrow ideas from other people and incorporate it into what you're doing. And that's what I did with some of Print Lab's curriculum. So this was borrowed from one of their ideas, and I kind of took it in my own direction. But you can see various iterations that my students have done. So on the left upper left-hand corner, that one's printed with the tough PLA. The one next to it is with the PETG, and that's usually like a translucent white or kind of a translucent black color. Both of those were printed on Ultimaker. The one next to it was modified to try to open up 3 different size jars. Okay, and that's printed with in PETG as well. The one on the right is a functional prototype. It did work when they finished it, and that was made with a 3D pen. And the one below is another design that was made by students, and the render was done in Fusion 360. And these projects, including some of the ones that are offered by PrintLab, they offer a good combination of skills. It's tied to various standards to help you cover what you may need to cover. And then, like with this, this is related to physics, right? Understanding levers and the fulcrum and your load and effort. So it's very interdisciplinary in terms of the projects, and I think that's really great depending on what you're doing as a teacher. And you can see a little short little video clip here of one of my students testing out her design that she did with her partner. Right, so moving on to the next category here is visual impairments, and I am also really passionate about helping students understand what visual impairments are and how to design for people with visual impairments. And as part of that, I developed a partnership with Build a Better Book, which is in Colorado, and it's all being run by the University of Colorado Boulder, and it's funded by the National Science Foundation, and they basically provide resources to help youth learn about designing for people with visual impairments and make tactile graphics. And they offer resources for educators to help you build a more inclusive like STEM makerspace as well. So I've been working with them. It's a really great program, and they have free resources that you can utilize as well for some of your design challenges. So you can see some of the work that I've done inspired by what I've been telling you about. This is a modified version of tic-tac-toe. You can see the prototype on the right-hand side that was made with cardboard, and the one on the left is 3D printed, and they modified it so that the pieces will stay in place once the person puts the piece into the slot for it, just in case so they don't get moved accidentally. And you can see here, I had a collaboration with another middle school about maybe 15-20 minutes away by car, and they had a lot of students there that had visual impairments, and I worked with their mobility and orientation specialists in order to have them come to my school and to have them talk to my students about what their daily life is like and what they're able to do. And they were able to give feedback to my students on the designs that they made. And it was a really great partnership. And I think that's a really awesome thing for you to be able to do inside of your community. So one of the stories that was told to me by the mobility and orientation specialist was that um, he had a father who wanted to help his son experience soccer, but he really didn't know a good way to do that. And I said, well, I'm going to go ahead and share this story with my students, and maybe we can make something for you now. So in the future, this could be something that you can utilize. So I had shared about 5 or 6 options with my students who were, soccer players and really interested in soccer. They were really passionate about taking this on. So this was one of the versions that a team of students made. You see it's using a combination of 3D printing. They used wood glue, and they cut the wood down, using our CNC machine. This was a tactile board game that 2 of my students made up. You can kind of see the work in progress here. So the board was cut down and partially cut with the CNC machine. They use vector graphic software to kind of lay out all these spots for the board. And then as we talked about visual impairments again, so visually impaired doesn't mean that someone is blind necessarily, right? They just may need modifications to help them to be able to see and understand the world a bit better. So one of the things that I've been told by working with people through my PLN who specialize in working with students with visual impairments, they told me that it's great to have strong contrasting colors. So my students use the white and that kind of bright neon orange to basically make up part of the board, and then they use the Velcro to help the pieces stay in place. So you can see the final version here. I taught my students how to use a brailler, so they have part of the instructions there on Braille, as well as full written documentation using the brailler for how to play the game. They did the pieces using the 3D pen and put those on the Velcro pieces, and then they use an orientation point, which is up here in the upper left-hand corner, to help them identify where they would physically start the game. And these are just a couple other examples here. They were all part of the collaboration that I was doing with that other school. And this is a modified version that my students were working on of a book called, I believe it's called Good Night Chicago. And this is again using CNC and 3D printing and the handheld brailler to make the braille. So it's a material called HDPE. I believe it's about 1/4 of an inch thick. It's basically a thick plastic, and it has a kind of a top layer, in this case is blue, and the layer beneath that is white. And you can use your software to control how much it's going to carve into it. And in the case on the left, students use a 3D pen to add in some depth to those music notes and kind of like the spots on the saxophone. And on the right, they use material from Michaels to simulate what a football feels like, and a 3D pen to kind of do like that threading on there. And then on here, they also use materials from Michaels to kind of simulate what a tree would feel like, and then kind of like that fabric feel for a kite. So to kind of wrap all of this up, I just kind of want to talk to you about what you can do. So try to find authentic challenges inside of your community. Collaborate with other schools, collaborate with organizations such as nonprofits. I know Lighthouse for the Blind is one that I'm hoping to make a connection with here in the DC area. I've done most of my educational career in Illinois. You can talk to students about what they are really interested in, and that's something good that as educators should be aware of anyway. So when students are trying to figure out how to work through a project, you can kind of use some of their interests to kind of help motivate them some more. And if you're developing your projects from the ground up, or you're using some inspiration from other places, just make sure you allow for a certain level of flexibility, right, to help kind of promote that sense of student agency where students can express their interests and be more engaged by being able to choose how they're going to work through a challenge. And if you can, if they're in your area, look to participate in a makeathon yourself. and maybe potentially look into a local maker fair. And you can even have your students submit entries for that. And that's a great way for them to get some authentic feedback from people who are attending that maker fair. If you don't have a PLN, I will start working on developing that. You can do that through social media, through NSTA, or any other professional organizations that you're a part of. That's been a big part of my growth over the last 4 to 5 years. I was doing it before, but when I started really getting into it, it really made a huge difference. And in terms of getting hardware, if you have the financial means or grants to get equipment, it's really good to identify a trusted partner. MatterHackers has, as you heard earlier, they have a lot of great resources for 3D printing, and they have some pretty cool videos on YouTube for each different machine, just to kind of help you develop a basic and sometimes a more in-depth understanding of different filaments and hardware. Personally, in my own experience with teaching, when I first started getting access to 3D printers, one of the schools that I worked at, we had a 3D printer that was constantly breaking down, and we went a very long time without being able to use a 3D printer, and it's very disappointing for the students to have a limited time with your teacher and access to that hardware to not have it work at all. So it's really great to have a partner to be able to assist you when things don't work properly. And then also, like I was talking about with Make Able, it's always great to participate in public competitions. There's a lot that are available out there, so I would just kind of seek them out and modify them as you see fit for what you're doing with your students. And then have them maintain a portfolio, right? It's good as a way to have them document their progress, to collaborate, and even more so now with students working virtually, they shouldn't always have to be in front of a screen. So any opportunity you can give them to kind of work through a project where they can do it with pencil and paper, I think that would be a great idea. So some general resources you see are available here. My presentation is available, and you'll be able to download that. But Tinkercad is one of the tools that I utilize with my students. Also utilize Onshape and Fusion 360. Fusion 360 is more so for kind of 8th grade and up, but I can talk about that more if people are interested. Instructables is a great website for researchers to learn how to make just about anything. Print Lab, they have a great 3D printing curriculum. It kind of goes from like a novice level to a good intermediate level for both Tinkercad and Fusion. Inventables, they make carving machines. That's what my students use to do a lot of their projects. And Ultimate or Dremel are the 3D printers that I've had the most experience with, and they've worked well with me, and they've had pretty good customer service when it was necessary. MatterHackers, as I've already discussed, they have a huge selection of products. They have the 3D pens, they have 3D printers, and they have pretty good support as well. And then SparkFun is a great place if you want to get into circuits such as Arduino Unos, Raspberry Pis, microbits, that sort of thing. And then in terms of instructional resources, MIT Edgerton is a great place for maker education. Obviously, it's part of MIT. They include a lot of different concepts, science, mathematics, and the projects that are freely available, and they offer workshops. And then as part of a project they did with an organization called Fundación Mustakis, which I believe is in Chile, it's an art-based organization, they showed them how they could make instruments without using the typical maker equipment that we might get access to, such as 3D printers and CNC machines. So it's more of a homemade sort of approach to maker education, but still utilizing mathematics and science along the way. Build a Better Book is what I talked to you about in order to help learn more about visual impairments. And Engineering Brightness is a nonprofit also in Colorado. And the Remake Learning and MakerEd, they offer great resources for designing equitable experiences for your students, and they also encourage that kind of student agency as well. Well, that is pretty much all that I have for you today. So if you have any questions now, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jones. We get some some virtual claps and reactions and hearts and parties going over there. We can give them a little love. So we have 4 minutes only because we've got another session that starts the room opens at 10:45 and they only give us one account. So we have to like shut this down, hard stop at 10:45 so we can open the other one. I did put a link to that next one in the chat if anybody would like to just roll on over with us and attend the next session. We do have one question here. We answered, there's like, it is raining resources in the chat, y'all. If you want to like, there's a way you can export the chat or just copy and paste it. We answered a lot of questions of like, what was that engineering brightness link? And what was the print lab link? All of that is in the chat. Just scroll up and copy and paste it. Two questions that did come up. One is, Mr. Jones, what would you suggest for using for modeling if students have an iPad? And then what would you recommend for a Chromebook?
Okay, so for modeling, I guess it all depends on the age range as well. But for modeling, I would say Tinkercad because it does work for touch on an iPad. So you can use it in Safari, you can use it in Chrome, and the app also allows students to do augmented reality as well too. So it's a really great resource to be able to use for touch-based 3D modeling. And then for a Chromebook, you can use Tinkercad as well. Depending on the age group, you can use Onshape and Fusion 360.
Thank you. And then Lori would like to know, what is your preferred student portfolio platform?
Well, basically, when I started developing this, I was at a school that used Google for Education. So I basically created a very detailed template using Google Sites. So that was used in combination with a physical sketchbook.
Awesome. And then we got one more. We'll just do rapid fire here from John. On average, how long does it take for your middle school students to fully complete a project? And are you producing curriculum for high school or special education is the second part of that question.
Okay.
So how long to fully complete a project?
So on average, I've gotten it down to about 2 to 2.5 weeks for the majority of the projects. If it's a really special project, I'm willing to go out to about 3 weeks. I'm used to working with students over normally an 8-week period. So I don't want to spend too much time, or 8 or 12-week period. So I don't want to spend too much time on one project unless it's something really big that we're working on. So we try to balance things out between small and large projects because of how long it takes to print everything as well too, and to create those prototypes. And sometimes we only have a certain amount of time to work with certain people. In terms of producing high school curriculum, I do create small projects that are applicable to high school students. I currently don't create an entire curriculum for the high school level, and I do offer modifications to my curriculum for special education. So I modify that for IEPs and 504 as necessary.
Awesome. Okay, and we do have to shut it down, but real quick, are you producing curriculum for high school or special education?
Yeah, that was the one I was saying.
Oh, sorry.
So,
okay.
No, it's fine. Yeah,
Yep.
I do make lessons for high school level students. I don't create an entire curriculum for the high school level, and then I do make modifications for IEPs.
Perfect. Okay, and I did put your Twitter in the chat a couple of times, so if anybody wanted to reach out to you, they can. If you have any questions at all about this presentation, or if you want to make sure you get access to this presentation, I think we posted it somewhere, but I'm not exactly sure where. So you can always email education@matterhackers.com for any questions that you have, or if you need to get in touch with Mr. Jones. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time. Thank you, Mr. Jones, for your just inspiring specific things to do in the classroom. You've gotten a lot of love in the chat.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Come join us in our next session. Bye.